Excellent. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to what's normally called Monday Night Magic, but tonight it's Thursday Night Magic because we just wanted to mess with you a little bit. No, it was travel schedules and such, but we're thrilled that you're joining us here tonight. And as always, your favorite epigenetic geeks, Ken Close and myself, Lori.falk, have come up with another little bit of a rabbit hole to take you down tonight. And we're going to really show you some components about the Healy that are beyond anything that's really being talked about. Wouldn't you say, Ken? I mean,
yeah. There's definitely some, everybody's talking about some of the basics, and that's great. But I think we're going to take a little bit deep dive, some things you might have heard before, but I think some things, correlations. We're going to build kind of a flow chart, a blueprint. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, you know that Ken and I are absolutely fascinated by the science of epigenetics, and that this amazing device is an epigenetic energetic device. And we talk all the time about how it works on the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual levels. But what does that mean? Those of you who know me and who have been attending these calls know that I've taken a deep dive into the coaching module. In fact, I tell everyone I'm having a love affair with the coaching module. And it's true, I really am. But as a coach for 20 years, when I see the capacity that this device has to find what's going on in the subconscious, it just amazes me. And just recently, I've been using it now since October, since it first came out. And recently, I started to really think about it at a different level. And that level is that, we're using it for personal growth work, which is fabulous. We're using it to improve our businesses, to increase our wealth, to enhance and improve whatever areas of our lives that we would like. But what we weren't really thinking about was the fact that when you're looking at it through an epigenetic perspective, we're finding these deep core limiting beliefs and ancestral programs that have been passed on generationally to us, much of it learned behavior from when we're pre-age 7, when the brain is only operating in a theta brainwave state, and there is no right or wrong. And so if mom wears a blue dress and dad hits her, wearing a blue dress equates to getting hit. Totally illogical, but that gets programmed in. And as those things get programmed in, they stick around sometimes for decades. So Ken and I were talking about the fact that, we all have these family histories, if you will, of disease patterns. And often over the years, it was expected that if there was a family history of heart disease, everybody in the family would end up with it. But the science of epigenetics tells us it's not the gene, because the gene doesn't have a brain and it can't turn itself on and off. So you don't need to worry about it if you fix the environment. And that's what we want to talk to you about tonight, is fixing that environment. And diet and exercise and having a healthier lifestyle overall than our parents and grandparents and ancestors is fabulous. But to get those beliefs that are stuck in the subconscious offline is so vitally important, not just to your personal growth, but to your overall physical health and well-being. Because if you don't have that belief structure, you're not going to trigger the thought that's going to trigger the emotion, that's going to trigger the chemical reaction, that's going to turn on the gene. Do you see what a gift that is? I mean, that is otherworldly amazing, if you ask me. Because I can tell you as a coach for all these years, to get in there, to find what this finds in just a few minutes, I say it shortens the learning curve from 6 months to 6 minutes. That's kind of how I usually describe it. And it's true. It's absolutely true. And I was so excited about that. But just recently, like my heart exploded when I went, oh my God, this is a whole nother layer that we really need everybody to understand, how we are really clearing things that can help your physical health and well-being.
Mm.
What do you think, Ken?
I love it. I love it. And so, like I was saying, we're going to kind of build a little bit of a flow chart, or, you know, from an engineering perspective, flow chart essentially is like a blueprint, but it just kind of gives you one thing onto another thing, onto another thing, onto another thing. So building a model so that you can kind of see how this expression from environment to the actual physical form of our bodies. And Lori said something very, very key there. And I want you to understand, and Bruce Lipton was one of the discovering founders of the understanding of the environment, where once upon a time it was thought that environment triggered the gene, or the gene triggered the expression of the body. The gene is influenced by the environment, right? What environment? So we've got two environments we need to look at. One, of course, is outside of us. So where you live, what you do, where you go, people you know, things you do, all that kind of stuff in your lives. Those are key pieces of environmental influence, as well as Lori was saying, some of the nurturing from childhood. That's still environmental influence, outside going in. But the other part of the cell is the inside of us. That's the environment for the cell. The cell lives inside of us. And so it's always looking at us as its, well, first its support structure and its creation structure. So if environment is signaling the gene, and it does, then how does that look? What exactly does that look like? So in other words, does that mean that, oh my gosh, you know, I live in the Bronx, or I live in Hawaii? Is it one environment's going to produce a better body than the other? Well, you know, yes and no, because the other thing to consider is that people have free will, right? You've got this free will, this inner understanding, or this ability to choose, the ability to think, the ability to perceive. And the way that we perceive, the way we think, has a big influence, essentially designs and creates our personality. And that's the way of being, right? We have a personal way of being. And that personality is a huge influence into our personal reality. Why? Well, because Lori said it. She said that there's things that happen in our younger years that we build belief structures around. For instance, the blue dress. Maybe somewhere along the line, you know, you had a heartbreak, right? And in earlier years of your life, you know, remember that first love in like junior high, or maybe it was even grade school. I mean, it's like the crush, right? My daughter's telling me all the time, oh my gosh, about this crush. And so this heartbreak from this person that happens one day after school, right? So he says, oh, I just, you know, I don't want to be your friend anymore. And he gets into this blue car and drives away, right? And we assign meaning to that. We assign meaning to that because we had an emotional response that was big and heavy within our body. And it writes to the codes in our body, right? And so then we start associating things with a blue car, no different than a blue dress. But we see something, we see a blue car that's similar to something we remember, and all of a sudden we feel sad. Don't really know why. No reason for it, but we just feel uneasy. And this is this influence from a code that was written, or a belief that was written. So let's talk about this blueprint a little bit. Does that sound fun? If we understand this environmental influence from the outside going in, environment is all around us all the time. But what's this filtering mechanism in which it winds up going from environmental influence all the way down to a genetic expression, or a code that writes a cell? What's that look like? So if we map it out, the environment's all around us all the time. But what's the first thing, the first part of us that starts to evaluate this environment? It's our senses, right? It's the sight, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell, what we see, what we feel. The sensory perception of the body is important. It's part of what enriches our experience of life, these sensory perceptions. So we feel something, we see something, we taste something, we smell something. Great. And then what? Well, there are neurological groupings within our brain, synaptic connections. These are networks of connections that are just efficient at taking content from the senses, making a judgment or an assessment, and then creating a thought, right? Or creating a redundant program. That's a thought. Honestly, a thought is redundant because most of the time, well, about 90%, 95% of the thoughts you have during the day are the same thoughts as yesterday, right? 60 to 70,000 thoughts per day that we're involved with. 90% or more are the same as yesterday. So if that's the case, it's pretty much a redundant process, yeah? Or it can be. I'm not saying these are all malleable concepts, but they're just typical. I want you to understand that what happens in a default mode is what we would call typical. So you have a perception, the senses take in content, a thought is already built about what this content means, a blue car, right? Heartbreak, sadness, unworthiness, jealousy, perhaps, whatever it is. These are neurological groupings within the brain that just has that redundant program that runs when we see something like that. So the next part, like I said, the perception comes in is assigning meaning to it. We've got to assign meaning to it. All right. Such as what we see, the blue car means unworthiness, lack of love, some kind of unserving thought. Okay. So now we've stimulated the thought. Think about this for a second. So now the thought gains a new influence. It creates a chemistry. It creates peptides that go down into the body, a chemistry that now starts to signal very specific systems within the body so that you can feel the way you're thinking. And the thinking continues to propagate the feeling. So the thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking becomes a cycle, right, within the body and the mind. And now you're in a full state of being of the perception of the environment. You follow me so far? So this is the model. Now, these are systems that are just built in because we've practiced and rehearsed so long and so well. And we've just never challenged it because it was just something written in as a younger person in a very influential time of our lives. It just goes right into the subconscious. And so this chemistry that goes into the body, AKA the peptides from the thought, starts to tap into certain cell receptor sites. And these cell receptor sites are just our genetic expressions of the body from the past. And they're just more efficient at feeling the thought that was generating the feeling. So again, if it's unworthiness, our body gets efficient at feeling unworthiness. And feelings are important because feelings are to the body as thought is to the brain, and the two combine to build the enrichment of life, the experience of life. Kind of what I believe life is all about is experiences, having experiences, right? We just have a plethora of experiences. The key is that we try to maybe not rehearse the same unserving experiences over and over. So as this chemistry starts to build these emotions, now remember, some of the emotions are good, some are bad, but it's still kind of a redundant process. We feel the chemistry, the feeling starts to propagate. Chemistry is still energy. The energy in the body starts to write more to the codes of the genetic expression for the cell. Because 97% of the DNA, the genetic code, is adaptive, reading what? The environment. And the environment is inside of you. And now that inside of you is being influenced by a chemistry to create the feeling. that was generated by a thought that was built from a perception that came from the outside environment. Do you see how the outside becomes the inside that becomes you? Right? That's the flow chart. Here's the hack. Let's talk about the hack. How about that, Lori?
Oh gosh, yes. Yes. So now we can go in. I mean, you could literally put in a program into the coaching module that said, every cell in my body is healthy and running at an optimal level at all times. Any former ancestral patterns that would generate disease patterns are now dissipated. I am healthy and happy and vitally alive. That's simple. And then really feel that, right? Because the Healy isn't reading what you're writing. It doesn't read words. It reads the environment. It reads the information field. It reads how you're feeling. So you feel healthy and vitally alive, and you run that analysis, and you will now come up with exactly what those blocks are, or beliefs are, or ancestral patterns are that could actually trigger you to not be healthy. And we can clear those, right? Now, once you have the cognitive by viewing the analysis and looking at what the Healy's come up with. But even if you didn't look at that and you just ran the frequencies, now the vibrational frequencies that are going into you are breaking down those patterns and obliterating them. Now, do you guys get how cool that is? You can't physically cut out the DNA, but you can shift the subconscious blocks that you're carrying. It is incredible. Cassie just posted, it's incredible. It's totally incredible. It really, truly is. And so you do that. And as I said a couple of weeks ago on What's Up Wednesday, the company would recommend that you run those patterns, maybe a minute and a half a dozen times a day. And I believe that to be true for the average person, because you don't want to take these deep dives unless you have support or you know what you're doing. Because once you start breaking down those old programs, you're going to feel different. You're going to wake up the next day and feel different. And you're going to react different. That's what we want to happen, right? Mm-hmm. We want to react different. But we're reacting differently because you're actually letting go of that stuff that's back there. And as we're letting go of it, we are now consciously choosing how we want to proceed forward in a healthier way. And we're creating new neural pathways instead of the old neural pathways.
Yeah, remember that. Look at that for a second. So think about this. The thoughts that we have, remember the 95% that are redundant from yesterday, all they do is just reinforce neural networks in the brain. Now these networks, these synaptic connections, these are neurons that come together to form a pathway, right? And when we have an experience, so you actually, let's just say that you read a book on building a birdhouse, all right? So you get cognitive understanding and it builds synaptic connections, up to 1,500 synaptic connections when you read the book on building a birdhouse. Now, within 24 hours to 72 hours, half of those get pruned away. Because why? Because you're not rehearsing them. You're not utilizing them. So you're not actually building the birdhouse. All you did was read the book. Now, different though, if you read the book on building a birdhouse, those 1,500 synaptic connections, and then you go out and you buy the wood, the material, right? You have to use your brain to think about content and what store to go to, where to get materials, how much to get. And then you start to make measurements, right? Using your brain and thought to cut the materials into proper form. And then you start to put them together. You drill holes, you hammer nails, maybe you even hit your finger with a hammer. Boom, now pain's involved. You've got more and more neurological connections, synaptic connections around this idea or this concept of building a birdhouse. Then you start to paint it, right? You smell the paint, you see that creative brain start to engage. Again, more synaptic connections. And it's rehearsal that continues to build the memory of this action, of this experience. And then when you've got that birdhouse out there and it's just sitting on the tree and it's amazing and it's attracting birds and they're coming in and you're enjoying that loving experience, again, more connections within that neural bundle, that network of neurons. So all of this is around building a birdhouse. It's no different than when the blue dress idea, all of those pieces were building a neural bundle, an efficient pathway, many millions and millions of neurons connected, so that experience is just an easier thing to recall when it comes to thinking about our worthiness. That experience comes to the forward thinking moment. And we know this is true by just simply, if I was to say, just think of an orange, right? The tasting of an orange, it's a very, very juicy and rich orange. And when you would break the skin open, it squirts a little juice out, maybe gets you in the eye and burns your eye a little bit. I mean, you could start building an entire memory around that. And you don't have to have an orange. You just have to follow some kind of a perception, an outside environmental influence, my voice and my description, that starts to trigger the neurological memories. And that efficiency of that thought, of that memory, it's just efficient. That's it. And so you can now recall it. And our subconscious works in pictures. It works in pictures. And so you see the orange, right? You see the blue dress. You see you remember the experience. And I also want to make sure that you understand that when the brain forgets pieces, that neurological network, so in other words, you're building the birdhouse and you got that one all done, then you go to build another one 10 years later, right? And you go and you remember all the stuff, but some of the details are missing. And so you go, well, I don't remember if I used a number 8 screw or a number 10 screw. And so you fill in the blanks. You just buy these materials and you start building your birdhouse. It looks a little bit different than the last one because your mind couldn't remember all the exact content of the first experience. So it just made stuff up and it filled in the blanks. This is another part of what our brain does. It doesn't want to be wrong. It doesn't want to be lost. It doesn't want to be incomplete. So it's going to make stuff up. Science, neuroscience says, write this down, 54% of what you remember is embellished, untrue, or completely false. 54%. That's crazy. But now, of course, we remember how to do 1 + 1 or our multiplication tables and that kind of stuff, right? Those are different than recalling an experience and all of the pieces around it. I mean, how many times have you ever sat with somebody that was in the same experience as you 10 or 15 years ago, and they're telling the story and you're going, wait a minute, that's not what I remember, right? That's because that neurological bundle in your mind and the perceptions that you were receiving, well, first of all, were from your point of view. But secondly, maybe stuff you forgot and your brain just filled in the blanks. So all of this content, the reason why we're telling you this is because this efficiency, the body wants to be efficient. The brain is only 3% of the body mass, but it consumes up to 20% of its energy. That's a big difference. It's a very small part of the body in terms of mass, but it consumes an enormous amount of the energy available to the body because it's job that it's doing. So it needs to be efficient. So it builds these synaptic connections, these neural pathways, so that the experience on the outside of us can stimulate a very efficient thought that can build a very efficient chemical in the body that has cells with very efficient receptor sites to propagate the outcome. All right. So what we're talking about here is this flow chart. So you can understand what's going on in your body. Information always leads to transformation. Always. If you don't know what's going on, you don't know the value of this redundant thought that keeps haunting you and what it's doing to you on the interior. And the genetic code, here's what's really cool. The genetic code, it doesn't matter if it's human or not. but the code itself has infinite possibilities, infinite combinations. It's like Christmas lights blinking on and off, right? This coding system. And there's certain things that trigger the on function and the off function, right? The genetic expression is influenced by the thought that we're talking about and the chemistry we're talking about, the interior of the body, which is the exterior to the genetic codes. And to the tune of 800,000 cells per second, you're being reproduced. And 97% of the genetic code that's being written for the new cell is reading the environment, reading the energy of the environment. Now, we talked about chemistry earlier. Remember the thought generating a peptide, which is the chemistry influencing this code. But the chemistry is broke down even more into the energy of it. The bottom line of all things is energy. And all those things have a frequency to them. Anger has a way different frequency than joy, right? Would you agree? And it's measured. There's charts all over the place showing you the frequencies of emotions as well as the consciousness of them. That's a different level as well. They have their own consciousness that actually influences us. So we're starting to build a model here on purpose so that you can see how to hack it. And let me tell you, you don't need anything outside of you to do this. You don't. There's a very diligent practice that we can do to stay within an awareness that we can choose the actual expression of that chemistry that I told you about. You have an outside perception, a trigger that comes into the mind, and we can sit with that moment and elongate what I call the choice point, elongate the choice point so that we don't have a thought that triggers an unserving chemical response. Now, when we have a thought without the emotion, now that's wisdom. That's emotional maturity. But how many people do that? I mean, I know none of you here are ever held hostage by your emotions or your thoughts. I know you guys are amazing. But the point is some people out there are, and we're going to coach them. We're going to help them. And this is where we use these tools, these biohacks. I'm a performance nut, and I can tell you that I have minimalized so many things in my life that I used to maximize to build my body. And I can do so much now with my mind, so much less with nutrition and exercise, actual physical pumping of iron. I can do so much less because now I have an awareness that I've reached a level where I can change my codes, right, by thought alone. And we all do it. We all do it. It's just that typically the default of the codes that are being written are unworthiness, right? Because of old blueprints, and the outside environment is giving us causation for lack. I mean, how many of you guys ever see these luxury car commercials? Boy, they make it sound good, make it look good. I don't have one. I'm like, I feel bad because I don't have one of those things, right? I could, but that's not how we should be operating. So now we get into the that coding system, right? And as Lori was talking about, the Healy, when we put intentions into that coaching program, we create a list from a database, the various databases we've chosen. We've refined what we're trying to accomplish, and then we kick the system on to do the analysis. Now we have content. We have content that we can now, just like building a birdhouse, we can read the book, right? We can read the book, which is the analysis. And that information gives us a cognitive skill. We can think differently. But the next level, what's the next level? You heard Lori say it. We can now put the energy frequencies out into the field or into our environment, into us, and start to hack that 97% of the genetic code that's adaptive. It's reading the energy. It's reading frequency. Remember what I said? It's just energy, but at a specific frequency. And now we have a blueprint, or I should say we have a cocktail of very specific frequencies designed to specifically align our misalignments. And we chose what we're trying to align. This is the cool thing about the coaching program. What do you want to fix? Well, I want to fix my finances. Okay, great. What databases are we going to look at to propagate that desire? Well, how about skills? How about personal relationships, right? How about finances? How about some of that things that we can choose all these databases? We can build a list of a grouping of databases in which it's going to analyze us and then give us content. And we just take it, we read it. That gives us the cognitive skill. We get the energetic influence from the frequencies. And now epigenetics is on. Right? How's that, Lori?
Game on. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you were talking about all the different frequencies, and I love this. This is from Abraham. It's a vibrational scale, and it shows you at the very bottom, the lowest frequencies: fear, grief, depression, despair, powerlessness. And this takes you up the scale, because you can't go from fear, grief, depression up to contentment. You've got all these layers in between. And what I want you to understand is, when you're starting this work, you're going to move up that vibrational scale. Well, guess what? Sometimes you're going to move down. And then you're going to plateau. And then you're going to move up. But each time you move up, you're not going back to ground zero. However, you can go back to ground zero because the old neural pathways are still there. What Ken was describing was creating all these new neural pathways, which is amazing. But the old neural pathway still exists. It's why an addict, let's just take alcohol, for example, can't have a drink. Because the minute they have that one drink, they're now no longer going from point A to point C, the new neural pathway. They're going right back from point A to point B, because they're setting off that chemical reaction. It's intensified, not just by how they're feeling, but by the actual chemical they're bringing into their body. Mm-hmm. So very, very, very important to understand that this is always going to be an up and down experience. And you can fall back into those old patterns very, very, very easily. So
one of the things that in neuroscience, it states that neurons that fire together wire together, right? This is this bundling of neural network of content, thoughts and experiences. Like I said, building a birdhouse, you measure the material, you cut it, maybe you hit your finger, you paint it. You see the birds that are living in it, the appreciation. You've got all these components that are built into this neurological bundle. Well, that just continues to remain, right? Because you're not going to unexperience anything. You cannot practice something, right? I use the analogy, you're not going to untaste the orange juice, right? You may never have a glass of orange juice again because it wasn't favorable in the moment you had one, but you remember it. Like I talked about the orange earlier. You'll remember it and you'll say, no, I prefer not, or yes, please. And that bundle, that neurological bundle is still there. And so neurons that fire together, wire together, but the same thing. And they build these multi-lane highways of efficient thought patterns, energy patterns, allowing this thought to keep, to be very efficient. Again, brain's got to be efficient. So the moment we decide to think differently, based on what? Based on the content from the coaching program, right? We choose that content, the cognitive information that you read, which is phenomenal, right? Tells us exactly where it's causation, whether we're wrong acting, wrong thinking, right? It also tells us where, in terms of its impact, whether it be a physical, emotional, spiritual. I mean, we're getting this rich content. So we can now think differently. And the moment we think differently, we build new synaptic connections, new pathways that start to build a more efficient highway. And the same thing, here's the cool thing. the synaptic fluid that the neurons are linked with is finite. There's a certain amount. And so in order for another neurological process to formulate, it needs to take some of that fluid from somewhere else. Well, neurons that no longer fire together, they unwire. That's called synaptic pruning. That's super cool. We can start down regulating this neurological bundle around that thought process that no longer served us, as we start to bring that energy over to a thought process that does serve us. And this, again, it's a twofold mechanism in which the coaching program helps us. A is the cognitive information, what we're reading, how we're analyzing it, right? And our coach, if we got somebody we're working with helping us out, is giving us even more rich content so that we can build that bundle properly and make the evaluations in a proper way. But the second thing that's happening is that those frequencies that you're getting into your body are also assisting you in genetic expressions of a body that now, remember what I said earlier, the thinking creates the feeling propagates a code or a signal back up through the vagus nerve into the brain to help stimulate the thinking. The efficiency of the thinking continues to propagate the chemical into the body. So the body now affirms the feeling that goes back up to the vagus nerve and it helps the thought. You know what I'm saying? You see that circle? So the moment the body and the cell structures get a new code because of the frequencies, now the cell receptor sites are down-regulated in efficiency. So that the same chemistry no longer fits in the cell's receptor sites the same. It's not efficient anymore. And the body starts to turn off this feedback loop through the vagal tone up into the brain that says, yep, I feel unworthy. It starts to not say so much of that because we're building a body that's no longer efficient in the feeling of unworthiness. I mean, it's just phenomenal, that flow chart, how it works. And this coaching module, I'm telling you, this is the ultimate hack. Now, like I said, we can do this by thought alone. We don't need a special diet. We don't need a special workout program. We don't need a Healy, but it requires a very diligent practice. And there's not a lot of people that are actually doing that to the degree that's necessary. And so the body still down regulates. Okay. So this is where our Healy comes in. I've been doing a lot of studies and actual experiments. And in the physical realm, we can generate muscle by thought alone, right? If we are diligent in our mind, we can see the action. We have to shut off all of the outer influences, closing our eyes, shutting down what we're hearing, going into a very concentrated thought. But what happens when you close your eyes and you maybe play some kind of music in your brain and you start to relax? What happens to your thoughts? Anybody? Do they go nuts? Do they start going wild and crazy, right? It's like all of a sudden you're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner tomorrow. Like, it's just not tomorrow yet. Or you're thinking about what you said that you shouldn't have, to a friend earlier that day. Or what it's like, or the brain's going, is that my foot? Is that my foot? Where's my foot? I mean, it's like, really? What's all this? It just happens. And that's the brain, because it's the mind, actually. The mind is trying to make sense of things. And when you take the senses out, it can't make sense of it, right? It needs that affirmation. So we take the senses out of the equation, close our eyes, put on some other music. We can't see or hear. Maybe we're comfortable. We can't feel, and all of a sudden the mind starts to go, hey, Ken, wait a minute. Remember about this time every day, you're usually in traffic and you're angry, right? We got to be angry. Come on, let's find something to be angry about. Remember that email you got? Yeah, we're angry about that. Remember, this goes on. So all we do is that's a process that we can do by ourselves, but it takes practice. And so now we know that we have a Healy that does this energetic influence. We can do all kinds of things with the microcurrent, but with this coaching module and the analysis engine, whether it be the aura, the resonance, or the coaching, all three of these use the same modality of influence for the body. It's an energetic influence, adjusting the genetic code. And I do a lot of neuroscience study. And the cool thing about thought is that you can increase muscle mass by up to 34% by thought alone. Think about that. How would you like to just be in deep focused meditation and get stronger, right? Add more balance to your body, or down regulate a disease? Well, you can, but it takes a very diligent practice. So we have the Healy to help us out. What else do we got?
Well, the key is not everybody has studied with Joe Dispenza for the last dozen years. So not everybody is as efficient at meditating as people like yourself. And while I admire that, and I do meditate, it's not at that level. And the average person doesn't even have the patience to sit down and meditate. So they won't have the discipline. So it won't happen. And that's why we are so blessed to have the coaching module, to have the Healy, to have this ability to find what's going on that's preventing us from what it is we're really, really wanting, and then to rebalance those programs.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you think you should start first when you're running a program like this? Self-worth and self-love. Because honestly, I can tell you that 98% of the people on this planet don't love themselves, not to the level of honest, true, compassionate, unconditional love. Because all we've heard from little on is don't do this and don't do that and don't do this and don't do that. And oh my God, you're a terrible person because you did X, Y, or Z. I mean, nobody ever sits down and goes, now, honey, why did you do that? Let's talk about it.
Not enough.
Today, I see parents doing that, but I don't think that our parents back in the day had any clue about any of that. So start with self-love, start with self-worth,
Mm-hmm.
and then move into forgiveness.
I was reading a study of a very large religious organization, and they pooled the congregation, not the congregation, but the actual ministers and the clergy, the leaders of the church organization. They pooled them and asked them what their most challenging perception was, their most challenging shadow influence. So this is the things on what I call below the line emotions. You saw that chart that Lori put. There was that line, that borderline just above boredom, where it shifted. So everything boredom down was what I call below the line emotions. So contentment is above the line. Those are things that start to propagate a positive signal more than the others. But this survey of all of these employees and parts of the church, heads of the church, what is your shadow emotion? What is your challenge emotion? And you know what it was? Worthiness. And these are spiritual leaders, right? So it's very valid what Lori's saying there about it being the biggest, most influential, because default out in our world, when we go out and operate within our world, and we haven't diligently created our day. In other words, we haven't created our day on purpose. We're going to be hostage to default, and environment will always be stronger than our will. You know, God gave us free will because it gives us the opportunity to make choices, pass or fail. And it's more strong than the God's influence. Our free will is the strongest thing, and it will override anything. And that's that power of thought. So as we're moving forward into this analysis, and working with our environment, it's very important that we don't go mindless. It's important that we don't go unintentionally. It's important that we start to think diligently about what we want to achieve and where we're going. And of course, the coaching program, the coaching module, gives us opportunity to get clarity. I mean, I do this often with people I'm working with. I'll hand them a magic wand. I'll hand them this pin. I'll say, here's a magic wand. If you have a magic wand, what would you do with it right now? So just think in your mind, I'm going to hand you a magic wand. Now, this is a magic wand. It can do anything. And if I handed you this magic wand, just think about it for a second. Just get in your mind for a second. Get quiet. And you've got a magic wand in your hand and you could do anything. Think about what you would do. Maybe write it down. Kind of write down what you would do with a magic wand if you had one right now and you could do anything. Imagination there's no limit. Okay. And 95% of the time, people that talk to me, it's financial. It's something to do with freedom, which equates to enough money to do whatever they want. Right. And so when I drill it down, they'll say freedom. Freedom's what I would wish for. What's that mean? What's freedom to you? I mean, we live in the United States, it's pretty free, right? I mean, we live in the safest time ever within this lifetime. And the humans today are way more safe than the humans that were predators and prey before. Remember, once upon a time, we live in a much safer environment, even though there's issues out there, but we're still pretty safe. So they ask for freedom, right? And we need to get a little bit more refined, or something to do with relationship, right? That's another one. Sometimes if one is plagued with a health issue, it's health. Again, and health issue down regulates our freedom. But think about it. Go beyond that. Go beyond that, because those are things that we could achieve on our own. What could you not achieve on your own? What is it that would require true magic to actually, true miracles, a true God touch to actually have? I mean, think about that. What would that be? Because think if you had that, then all other stuff would be already done. Freedom would be a small piece of the pie. You know, I mean, what can I not do? I can't fly. I want to be able to fly, right? If I could fly, don't you think that, I mean, on my own power, if I could fly, I'd probably have a lot of money. I'd probably have a lot of great relationships. I'd probably have pretty good health. I probably already have all those other things because I could fly. That's the things that we need magic for. Anyway, so I just invite you guys to think about that. And then when you're building out your intentions in the coaching module, put that component of magic on there, because it's going to start to upregulate some of the outcomes, and those frequencies are going to wind up going into your body. And guess what? We're going to be flying.
Absolutely. And many people, if you ask them what they would wish for with their magic wand, would say perfect health.
Yep.
And, you know, they would want to erase those epigenetic DNA disease patterns that they have inherited from their ancestors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can now. Did you see how low on that chart unworthiness was? It was like line 2. It was just one step above grief. It's such a low vibration, and yet most of us are carrying it. So if we can clear that unworthiness, and we can really get to a place where you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I love you, and believe it to the level that you do when you're telling it to someone who you do love,
Mm-hmm.
another human being. When you can look in the mirror and say, I love you to yourself, and feel that love, now you've made progress. And I can tell you, I've done it with the coaching module. We also have creative homeopathy. Let's not forget that. That is an incredibly powerful program group, incredibly powerful. And that will give you right to your top 5, right? but it's not going to find necessarily the ancestral pieces. And if you look into when you're looking at that analysis and you look at the ones that have the letter D, that's where you're going to find whether it came from your parents, your grandparents, your ancestors, karmic patterns, whatever. That's where all that shows up. Those are the causes. That's what's causing or preventing you from obtaining that intention that your heart so wants and that your mind so wants. It's the stuff in the subconscious that you're not aware of that's keeping you from what it is you're wanting to attract. Whether it's health, whether it's abundance, whether it's romance, whatever it is in your life, there's something blocking you. And now we can see what it is. And as we're moving up the vibrational scale of emotions into these higher frequencies, and we're releasing all that crap that most of it is inherited, we're also creating a healthier environment. And that I think is the main point that we really want to drive home to everyone here tonight is this is so powerful and so important. And remember, sharing is caring. So now that you know this, please share this device in a more profound way. Please go out and share this message and let people know the absolute true value of what we're holding in our hands.
You know, the once you learn something, and if we learn it to the extent in which we could teach it, then this is where our experience starts to turn into wisdom, right? And if we teach it to someone else and then they have an experience and have their own wisdom, now the more we propagate that content, it becomes truth. So we just need to test it, try it on, like a nice jacket or a nice blouse, try it on, and then give it a test drive. You know, the cool thing about the human is that we can evolve in one lifetime. Plants and animals take many, many lifetimes to evolve because they don't have the cognitive frontal lobe, the reasoning skills, the understanding. They don't have free will that we have, but we can literally evolve in one lifetime. You can out evolve your ancestral influence and not pass it on to your children. This is the cool thing that I find extremely valuable because, again, in science, it shows that there is a pattern that carries 3 generations forward, even more, depends on the pattern. But there are patterns that wind up going for 3 generations. Now, this is just default, by the way, folks. We're rewriting the normal. Okay, I just want you to know we're striving for the 3-minute mile. You know what I'm saying? So we're rewriting some of the old principles, you know, the Newtonian principles where cause and effect were the equation that was pretty much the norm. But now this quantum law, we're now tapping into and experiencing causing an effect. We're causing an outcome, right? So that's the cool thing that we're in now. We're in this quantum law. And the Healy's got a quantum sensor that attaches to these laws that literally interfaces within the guidelines of these laws, not Newtonian principle, not Newtonian principle. You can still see it happen, but it's just part of the whole. Quantum physics does incorporate Newtonian principle, but it supersedes it. It becomes obsolete because we can change things in a much more profound way, in a quicker way. And we need to teach that. We need to get out there and teach it. We need to get as many people understanding what we're talking about tonight, and then continue to rehearse it so that we can build new truth. Right?
Absolutely. And what I always tell my clients is if you're doing this level of work, you're not just doing it for yourself. You're doing it for your children and your grandchildren and your great grandchildren, because through quantum entanglement, the minute you clear it, it's cleared for them. Mm-hmm. It happens that fast. I had one client who We'd done a ton of forgiveness work, and this was before I had the Healy. But regardless, it works, right? When you do the forgiveness work, when you make the changes within yourself, she saw it actually happen in her home. Her 3 sons were together, and they had a conversation that normally would have ended up in World War III. But she had just done this huge shift in her own work. And she said she couldn't believe her ears. They were sitting and listening to one another and actually saying, oh, I never thought about it that way. And oh, I can see your perspective and where you're coming from. She said, Lori, I almost fainted. I honestly almost fainted. And they hadn't heard any of her sessions. They didn't know any of the stuff she'd been doing. But the minute she released it, boom, so did the kids.
Yeah, isn't that beautiful? I love that. And it's a consciousness that we're shifting. It's a consciousness that we're shifting, and we're all tapped into a consciousness. So it's an instantaneous upregulation of a whole species, a whole awareness. It's not something. So not only did those children get that influence from her clearing and her new knowledge, so did I.
Right.
Right. So
yes.
Yeah. That's the beautiful thing. And there's a question in the chat here about what does the negative numbers mean when you're getting those reports? Remember, we have conscious and subconscious. We have aware and unaware, right? So we have systemic and acute. So that's where that positive and negative is happening. The negative is more behind the scenes, more integrated into the being of you, who you are. So it's going to be more of the ancestral content, things like that. There's a great chart that has been available for a long time. Yeah, there it is. Lori's showing it. That gives the very distinct meanings of the readings from it's a dilution chart. But it also tells you what the negative and positive is, how it's, where it's interfacing with the being, with the person. Negative is going to be back there in the background, subconscious. And some of those things, by the way, and you've heard Lori was just saying some of this too, they can still be high percentage. They can be very high percentage because they can have a high level of influence on us. But be in the subconscious or the systemic influence, the whole system wide, right? And it's in the negative realm. When I don't like negative seems to have this unpositive connotation, right? But it's actually just means it's in the background. It doesn't mean anything bad. So those can be super highly influential, and we're not clearing them. And so they're having a very detrimental influence on the biology. And so you'll see some of the numbers reflect that content.
Right. And so in my group coaching programs, we go over this a lot. This is the cheat sheet. This is the chart we're talking about. And you can memorize all this and you can figure it all out. And the most interesting part, I think, is where did it come from? But the most important part isn't on this sheet. The most important part is what we're talking about tonight. If you didn't know how to interpret that analysis, it wouldn't matter. What matters is that we have a device that has the capability of finding what's in the way, of finding those patterns that could actually ultimately create disease patterns within your body. The fact that we can find them and clear them is way more important than whether you understand every single detail. It helps to understand it. It helps if you're working with a client. It helps from that perspective. But we're not really trying to fix the cognitive mind. We're trying to fix the subconscious mind. And the Healy is going to do that because it's going to shift. It's like those beliefs are getting shook loose, and they just don't have the grasp that they had. And then they start going away. But here's another thing. that you guys really need to be aware of. When that happens, you're going to change, and you're going to change in profound ways. And when you get together with family and old friends, some of them aren't going to understand you.
Mm-mm.
They're just not going to understand you. And if you're doing this work and your significant other isn't doing this work, here's what happens. You guys came together because you were at the same vibrational frequency, right? And now you're doing this work and they're not. And now what's happened? You're like two ships passing in the night. And the person who has stayed where they were is like, you're trying to pull them up and they're trying to pull you down. And it's like this push-pull or this. It's not this.
Remember what I said about environment. This is the key. What she's talking about is environment, because the car you drive, the house you live in, the people you know, the places you go, all have energy assigned to them. They have meaning assigned to them, right? That from your past. And the moment you change something about yourself through the coaching program, through some book you read, or some amazing event, the moment you have an aha moment, it changes this process within you, and your personality starts to change. And so what happens is your personal reality is going to make an adjustment. And so you'll drive the same car, but it'll feel a little different. You'll see the same people, but they'll act a little different. You'll go to the same places, but they'll look a little different. And suddenly you don't fit the same way. That model is not the same. Now you could choose to stay in your new unique self, which is what you need to be doing. Or what happens to when people can't identify you because you're different, they can't justify who they are anymore. This is the hard part, because they don't feel comfortable anymore because you are too awesome. No, you got to jump back down to my level because I can't justify who I am, and you won't complain with me anymore. I can't handle that. So they're going to work on trying to bring you back into the crab pot. All right. And so it's important. It's okay. When you prune synaptic connections and build new neural pathways, it's okay to prune relationships and people and things to support that. It's a necessary thing. And in some cases, it's a dark night of the soul, but on the other side of that, you're better for it. And you're not going to be continuously dragged down. You're not overcoming your environment and yourself. Believe me, it's hard enough to overcome ourselves. We don't want to also add the baggage of overcoming everyone else. So we're at the end of our hour. Any questions that we didn't catch in there?
I think Paula asked one. Should you rerun and create a new program based on what you're intending from time to time? I would say yes, because it's whenever you're doing this level of work, it's like peeling away the layers of the onion. And your psyche can only handle so much at one time. So it's going to clear that first layer. And once you have adapted to this new way of being in the world, if you run that same program again, perhaps a month later, well, now you may be ready to take it to a deeper level, and more things are going to bubble to the surface. So it's an ongoing process. And remember what we said earlier, the old neural pathways are still there.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever watched a movie twice? Did you notice something different the second time around that you didn't see the first? It's because you're not the same person the second time you watch it. You know, the reason that the pro football players or pro ball players go back to the film and watch the replay is so they can have cognitive awareness of their own bodies and their own placement, so that the next time they're in that situation, they'll place their foot a little different. They'll place their arm a little different. Or if it was favorable, they'll do exactly the same thing. This is this awareness piece that we're building. And so, so these are some of the amazing tools, guys, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so grateful for what we have. And let's just get a deeper understanding and keep rehearsing this content until we know it, and what we can go out and teach it. I want to come on to your call next time.
Absolutely. And why are we going to go out and teach it? because sharing is caring.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We've got to get this information out to the world. You know, we don't want to keep this a secret anymore. So take what we've shared with you tonight and go out and teach other people that are on your teams already. And even more importantly, this is yet another profound reason why someone should want to have a Healy in their lives.
Absolutely. Well, let's all share. This recording will be available to everybody wherever you found this invitation. Recording will be there. So if you found value in it, certainly share it out there.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Lori. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you and to co-create. I'm so grateful. Thanks to everybody who came. Big love to you. And I look forward till tomorrow. Don't forget, Frequencies and Friends. The link is in the Telegram group. If you guys haven't registered, jump on there. That this Frequency and Friends is going to be a recording. It's not going to be live, and it's going to be from the APEC group that's going to be doing the recording, but still good information to take part in. All right.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We love you. Thank you, Ken. You're amazing. I love doing these with you. And I posted earlier in the chat the dates for the upcoming events for the rest of the year. Remember, most of all, it is the second Monday of every month. All right. Thank you.
All right.
And
Bye,
God bless
everybody.
all of you.
Bye, everybody. Have a good night.